Hello and welcome to the meeting room. I'm Paul Harvey.
And I'm Holly Patrick.
Today we're talking about imposter syndrome with Kat Kevern, the director of Electric Cat Productions and the chair of NOWI, the Network of Women in Events, and also with Laura Capell-Abra, the founder of Stress Matters. Welcome along to the show. We're going to go for a quick word from our sponsors, IHG Hotels and Resorts.
At IHG Hotels and Resorts, we're in the business of you.
We're here to help you plug in,
connect and recharge,
make an impression,
and meet with confidence.
With 19 brands built for business,
your business gets even more rewarding.
With an award-winning loyalty program at 6,000 IHG hotels and resorts worldwide.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you both about imposter syndrome today. Laura, I'm going to start with you. What is imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome is actually more of a feeling. So it's when we feel like we're not deserving of something, or we might feel guilty that someone's going to find us out, that we're in a position that we don't think we deserve. It can make us feel quite anxious. It can make us feel like actually we don't deserve to be there, and we don't deserve to really have any opinion or voice in the room.
Yeah, I think that was a really good way to describe it. Definitely a feeling, something that might prevent people from putting themselves forwards, from putting their hands up, from maybe taking on certain projects. Or I think it comes up a lot in the workplace, but I guess it can also come up in people's personal lives as well.
So I know that imposter syndrome as the terminology, as the phrase, was coined back in the late 1970s. So we've been talking about this for a really long time. But why do you think it's so prevalent now?
So I actually think things that have happened over the last few years have changed the way we think about things. So things like remote working can actually have an impact on how we feel, because we're kind of hiding sometimes behind a screen. And so we're not sure if anybody quite knows how skilled we are or we're not. So I think that's one of the reasons it's coming up more now.
I think it's interesting. Sometimes the more people talk about it, the more people can start to identify with it. So if I had never heard of it, maybe I'd be experiencing it to a slight degree. But I think sometimes there can be that negative impact where the more a problem gets spoken about, sometimes it has that snowball effect where more and more people start to think it's affecting them. And once you get something in your head, sometimes it then makes it worse.
So that's a really interesting point. So we're talking about it. We can identify as part of a community, know that we're not alone with the imposter syndrome, but maybe we don't always have the solutions to get ourselves out of that mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes people come to me in a coaching session and say, I've got that imposter syndrome, which I find a really interesting an interesting thing to the point of, people know about it or have heard about it. They can identify a little bit more with it and give themselves a label. I think you're right.
What do you think causes imposter syndrome, and maybe what are some of the triggers in our industry, in the events industry specifically?
I think the nature of what we do, and that every event is so different, every company is different. And I was freelance for almost 8 years before starting my business. And for me, every event I'd go to was new, different. Obviously, after a few years, things started to fall into a bit more of a routine, but things are always changing. Everything's always different. So I think naturally when we're doing something for the first time, we're always going to feel a little bit more out of our comfort zone.
Yeah, I think there's always bigger events. There's always more complex events. As you say, there's always people that have just done that bit more than you. And when everything is always new and always adapting, it is hard to feel comfortable when you're not quite sure if it's going to go the same way as previously.
Do you think there's much imposter syndrome in the events industry?
We see it a lot with NOWI, the Network of Women in Events. So to give a little bit of context for those of you who aren't familiar, so it's a community of women who work in and around the events industry. So we've got people at all different levels, whether it's beginners, midway, or that are very senior as well. And that is something that comes up so frequently in our conversations. So we have a mentorship program. I'd say that that's one of the key areas that our mentees will mention in their applications. So I think it can be a bit of a female trait as well. And as we all know, there are lots of women in the events industry. And yeah, you mentioned about it being an ever-changing landscape. I think the role of new technology, everything being bigger and better and becoming more and more complex, it is going to make those feelings arise in certain people, yeah.
From my experience of working with businesses and individuals, I don't see it as only being female. I know a lot of the research when the kind of term came about was very much focused on women and females in kind of high intensity roles. And obviously we do absolutely have a lot of those in the events industry. But I think if I look at the client base, for example, that I work with, actually the majority of people that I think are probably experiencing those feelings are actually men. Now, that is not to say it's a male-only thing at all, but I do think it hits everybody. It's young, it's old, it's older, it's younger. I think everybody always wants to be better than they are, which is great in many ways. We're ambitious. It's an industry full of ambition. Which means we're always trying to do something that's slightly outside of our comfort zone. So I think it is quite prevalent in the events industry, not necessarily more so than other industries, but it's definitely here. I think the latest stat I saw is something around 70% of people experience these type of feelings. So obviously, naturally, then that's a lot of people in the industry.
That's pretty much everyone, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chances are most people you meet will have
Exactly.
suffered from it.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, actually, I think sometimes people don't necessarily know what it is, and so haven't labelled it themselves, but are feeling a little bit anxious, are feeling a bit out of their depth, which we can call imposter, or we can just say that's how you feel on a day-to-day basis. So I think you're right. I think it probably is higher. And I think that's a good thing in a way, because I think actually for most of the time it pushes us to do amazing things and try that bit harder. Of course, there's the downside of it, of when it stops us taking opportunities, which is clearly a big challenge that we need to work through. But I think that sense of ambition that is one of the driving triggers of it, I think can be a really positive thing if we harness it appropriately and we're kind of we have that kind of awareness to be able to work through that. But of course, as we said, it can be quite debilitating as well.
The age thing is interesting because, like, you might have assumed that with age comes confidence and you would be less likely to have imposter syndrome as you get older. But are we saying that's maybe not the case?
I think that's super interesting because, again, kind of touching on my point that I mentioned earlier around technology always being evolving. And I've worked with teams of very different individuals, whether they're super experienced or very new. And I think it kind of reminds me of, like, on social media, you sometimes see the memes of, today I taught my company director how to turn a Word document into a PDF.
And we shouldn't laugh because it's a very real thing, isn't it?
I'm just thinking, I'm not sure I would know how to do that.
It's funny, isn't it? Because, yeah, exactly. I think maybe on the outside, and this is perhaps like the grass is always greener, or it always looks better from the other side. So people might think, well, when I get to the age of 50, I'll be established, I'll know it all, I'll be confident. But actually, perhaps those feelings can start creeping in when you feel even more out of touch with all the new technologies, all the new systems. And nowadays, it's like all these different software for different things. And that in itself can perhaps impact.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I was speaking to a guy this week, actually, a new coaching client, and he has been running his own business for, I think it's 7 or 8 years, just exiting his business. Very successful business, has done very well for himself and a couple of other business partners. And he used the word whether or not he was worthy for a high-level job in another business. And I thought that was so interesting and really kind of aligns with what we're talking to today. You can have run a really successful business and still feel like an imposter and still feel like you're missing something. I was talking to another client who was really looking about whether or not they should do a master's or not, because they wanted that for them. They wanted the recognition of a piece of paper to say, I know what I'm doing. Now, nothing wrong against masters at all, but when we worked it through, that's what they needed. It was the actual kind of stamp of approval from somebody else to say you do know what you're doing, rather than necessarily learning new skills for that person. So I think it really does vary per person. I don't think there's a one more than the other. I think absolutely there's a lot of kind of younger people in the industry that simply haven't been exposed to a lot of opportunities or experiences. So of course, naturally, they feel less confident many times and feel a bit like an imposter because there are loads of people around them that are really experienced they might be looking up to. But equally, as we're saying, I think those that are further in their journey and in their career, there's always something. There's always something new, somebody a bit more skilled and, a bit more experienced in that area. And we're always looking around, and we're not very good, I think, a lot of the time at just focusing on our own career. We focus a lot on other people's careers and what everybody else is doing.
Absolutely. I think we can all relate to that. So we've spoken about different demographics, but do you think there is anybody that's immune to these feelings of being an imposter. Because some people can just get on a stage at the drop of a hat and talk about any topic and come across super confident, right? Whereas other people's, that is their worst nightmare. So do you need this sort of level of self-awareness? And if you don't have that, does that mean you don't suffer? Or is anybody really immune from imposter syndrome?
I think it's really interesting what you said there about the idea that you've got to have a certain level of self-awareness to experience it. I think it's probably the other way around. I think actually, if you increase your self-awareness, those levels of feelings of an imposter can reduce rather than increase, because actually you're aware that you have your own strengths, other people have their own strengths. You know what you bring to the table, maybe what some of your trigger points are, what some of your maybe your coaching world limiting beliefs are, or fake news stories is what I normally call them. If you increase your self-awareness, you've got a better understanding of what you're comfortable with and what you're not, rather than everything feeling a little bit overwhelming and scary, which is what it can do as an imposter. So I don't think people are immune to it. I think those people that don't experience it, you could argue maybe aren't pushing themselves quite enough, that actually they could probably challenge themselves a little bit more. But I think actually you also kind of said that they come across to not be having any challenge with standing up on stage. I think we always need to remember that somebody can be standing on stage talking about something, coming across really confidently. You've no idea what they're feeling or thinking in that moment. They could be absolutely terrified, but they've just done it. And that's the difference.
I think there's a big difference between putting yourself out of your comfort zone, which actually that is where the growth happens, isn't it? I think if we don't put ourselves out of our comfort zone, then we're never going to improve and gain better experiences and develop our skills and so on.
And looking forward to that growth, as opposed to I'm going to fail at this. It's growth. Everything we do comes with growth.
Yeah, there's something called mindset. So we have a growth and a fixed mindset. And the fixed mindset basically is I'm either brilliant at something, so I don't need to really try, and we don't like it if we're not so good at it at some point. But for most of us, it tends to be I'm not very good at that. So I'm not good at public speaking, or I'm not good at budgets, or I'm not good at creative, whatever it might be. And so we have what we call this fixed mindset. So we find it difficult to believe anything other than that opinion about ourselves. And then the alternative to that is growth mindset. So if we have a growth mindset, we're thinking, well, I might not be brilliant at it yet, but I can get better. And I want to give it a go and learn and improve. And I think when we can kind of reshape our feelings of being an imposter into this is a growth mindset opportunity of, I might not be good at it, but if I don't try, I'm never going to get better. And I think that's the difference when it comes to imposters, is the imposter feelings is actually, have I got a growth mindset about this, or have I got a fixed mindset? Am I going to try and improve and try to feel more comfortable? Or am I just going to say, nope, it's not for me, and have that fixed mindset to something?
I just want to go back to talking about comfort zones, and we all understand what that means, but I wonder if you could both share a real world example, maybe from your careers in the events industry, about what happened when you stepped outside of your comfort zone and what that did for you.
My whole career has been a succession of stepping out of my comfort zone. I don't think there are many days where I can say today I knew exactly what I was doing and I've done this all before. I'm not even 30 yet. I've been freelancing for years. I've lived in 4 different countries. I've freelanced when I've turned up, and sometimes I don't even know what the job title means when I turn up. And I turn up and I do the job. And
wow.
Every time I do a job, I've done it for the first time because I've had no training. I've not been in-house with the company. I've not gone through that traditional route. I met someone, he said, do you want to come and do artist liaison? And I was like, what's that? Yeah. And then, I was kind of piecing it all together as I went along. And then probably another huge example was starting my own business. I don't want to say I had no idea, but you never know until you do something. So for me, that was a huge learning curve. I mean, still, I'm learning every single day about managing a team. Now I got handed an organisation with 5,000 women, and I got handed a bank account and a login for a website, and I was literally Googling what does a chair do? What does a committee consist of? I was 25 when that happened. I had no idea how that all worked. Luckily, I had some amazing people around me who supported me, and I have an amazing coach. It's been a succession of pushing myself out of my comfort zone every day.
It sounds like you enjoy being out of your comfort
Oh,
zone.
100%. Wow. I love it. I mean, I think that it's a reflection of my personality. Within my personal life, I love traveling, I love backpacking. I've been to Central America 3 times on my own with nothing other than a backpack and one night in a hostel book. So I've always just pushed myself out of my comfort zone. I think the other one, again, is public speaking. So it kind of happened through NAWI, and that's how I got involved. Was someone put a post in the NAWI group, so one of the founding members put a Facebook post, and she said, does someone want to get involved with a panel at EPS? And I was like, what's EPS? What's a panel? I went on YouTube and watched a video of a panel, and it was just curating the content. So it was sort of thinking of the questions, bringing on board the panellists, and just making sure on the day everyone knew where they were going. And then the host dropped out, and I remember it was me and another girl, and we kind of looked at each other when it happened, and I could just see her face, like she just wanted to melt into the chair, and she looked at me like, and I just had that massive grin, because I was like, great, I'm going to be able to embrace this new opportunity. And then it was absolutely dreadful. I looked back on the video and it was awful. And going back to kind of what we were saying earlier about that is how you grow. And it, I'm so glad that I did that when nobody knew my name, nobody knew who I was.
So would you say, I just want to ask, would you say you have a mindset of what's the worst that can happen if I do this?
As long as people's health and safety aren't at risk and it's not going to impact on some of those crucial elements of the event, I think there is a fine line between, and I've told you those great stories. I could also tell you the flip side where things have gone wrong and it has been awful. And if I wouldn't, and now I just sit back and I laugh, but I've had some jobs that have not gone well, and we all have, but I'm also just very honest about that. And should I have said no to the job? Possibly. Should that person not have given me the job in the first place? Possibly. So there are different ways of looking at it, but ultimately I'm just so pleased that I made those mistakes early on in my career.
I think I'm probably similar in the sense of I feel like I was always taught say yes and work it out afterwards. So when you were saying about looking on YouTube, I'm like, yeah, so many times if someone said, right, you want to do this, and I used to work agency side, so we get briefs from clients, and the response was always, yep, we'll do it. And then we'd scurry away and work out how to do it afterwards. And I think I've just always had that mindset of say yes, work it out later, which in my mental health and wellbeing world, you should sometimes say no and have boundaries, of course. But in terms of the comfort level of, yes, say yes, work it out. And there's always somebody that knows. And I think if you know who to turn to, or Google or YouTube or where to turn to, then you can always kind of work out a way. So I think I've always had the approach of I'll work it out, even if it's not done in the best way. And I love how you were saying about if you look back on videos and things now, I think there's some horrific stuff I've done in my past that I absolutely wouldn't want to see again. But I know that's probably the stepping stone to kind of improvement every single time. And so I kind of think, well, I'm never going to be perfect at anything. I don't think anyone's perfect at anything. And so I know I'm not going to be, but as long as I'm always improving, then I'm good with being out of my comfort zone. And I think, yeah, I make mistakes all the time, and I always will look back and go, oh, I should have done that better. Even this morning, I was doing a coaching call with someone. I was like, oh, if I'd said that would have been a better kind of reworking of that question, but I didn't. And so we carry on. And the next time that comes up, I might change that question again. And I think as long as you're looking and learning every single time, then being uncomfortable is great in that respect. So I feel like I'm learning every single day, and I don't think I would do that if I stayed in my comfort zone and didn't ever feel like an imposter. I think if I was just like, this is my world and I'm not doing anything different, I just think I would never have been able to do anything that I do today. And that would be really sad for me. It would be a very boring life in my mind.
Absolutely. I feel like I should say here, I wouldn't even be here if I hadn't stepped out of my comfort zone. And because when I got my job at M&IT, I saw it advertised, first of all, and it said reporter in the events industry. And I thought, I don't know what the events industry is. I can't do that job. And it was only when a recruiter rang me up and said, you've got an interview, made me go along, that I went along and I got the job. And I remember turning up for my first day and thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing here, but it'll be okay. And it was.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. I think we all do that. Yeah, when I was working at the agency, I was asked by the board of directors to become managing director. And in my mind, I was way too young to do that job. That wasn't the job that I thought I should be doing at that point in my career. And And I felt really uncomfortable about it. And they were saying, no, it's going to be great. We're here. We've got you. And to your point, Kat, about people around you and them trusting me, I look back on it now and go, and thankfully I think it went fine, but I look back on it now and go, well, they trusted me and I trust them. So actually, I kind of have to always remember that if you find yourself in a job you don't think you should be in because you feel a bit uncomfortable and you feel like an imposter, somebody else believes in you.
I just want to talk then, Laura, about the relationship between imposter syndrome and if it can lead to burnout, which is also a topic that we speak about a lot, especially in the events industry, very high paced, long hours, never a 9 to 5. Do you think there's a relationship between them? Do you think we can get stuck in that cycle that imposter syndrome leads to burnout and then vice versa and we keep going around? And how, if we do, how do we break away from that?
Yes, I definitely think there's a connection. There's a lady called Dr. Valerie Young who came up with 5 different types of being an imposter, and one of them is perfectionist. And I think that's the one I see a lot in the events industry, is that we want it to be perfect and we keep working and we're not happy to put something out unless it is perfect. And there's various other kind of types of imposter as well, but I think that's quite often where the burnout can happen, is that we're aiming for perfection. Or there's another one called Superwoman or Superman, where you feel like you must be able to do everything. Again, another one that's about being, I think it's called a soloist, where you think you have to do everything yourself, otherwise you're not good enough. And I think those types of imposter feelings really show up in the events industry because you keep working harder and not necessarily smarter, and then you can burn yourself out. And if you don't want to, if you're not the kind of person that likes asking for help, then again, you're not necessarily telling your manager or your colleagues that you need support. So again, you're trying to take all of that work and maybe lack of knowledge, frankly, if you don't know what you're doing, but you don't feel comfortable enough to ask somebody, then you take it all upon yourself. And we all know that it's a high pressure industry anyway. So you add that into the mix. And I think there's a real big connection between those things. I don't think it means that it has to always be the case. I think if you've got a culture in your business, in your team, that people do support each other and you can check in on each other and you can see the signs in somebody that they're experiencing high levels of stress and that therefore support them before they hit burnout. I don't think it's inevitable at all, but I think it requires people to be considerate of others and to look out for ourselves, but each other. And sometimes, frankly, we're just not very good at that in this industry, because as much as we're a people-based industry, we're busy and we're focused and we're quite often head down on the job we're trying to do, and we don't spend that much time looking up and seeing how our colleagues are and how we're doing. So I think there's opportunity for us to improve, and I think a lot of that comes from the team culture and looking out for each other. But I do think, going back to what we said earlier around self-awareness, I do think there's work that each of us can do individually to ask ourselves why we're feeling uncomfortable with that, why we're not asking for help, why we're delaying doing something and procrastinating through perfectionism or whatever it might be. So I think there's a balance between improving on each of our individual self-awareness, but also trying to create team environments where we're looking out for each other and we're saying 80% is good enough. That is, we're not going to be 100%. 80% is a good amount to be at. And how do we aim for that instead?
Thank you. And Kat, earlier on you mentioned that you're part of a network of 5,000 women. That's probably grown since you were 25 and took over there. What's the benefit of being part of a supportive community, especially when you're trying to overcome feelings of imposter syndrome?
It's an amazing community to be part of. I think I get probably even more great feelings and satisfaction and support from it than others, but I don't know, maybe others get as much out of it as well, because we get the most wonderful messages. And someone just messaged me literally just yesterday. I shared it on my LinkedIn because it was so special, and it kind of reminds us as a team why we're putting in that time and why we put so much thought and consideration, and we really want to make it as great as we can for everyone. And with that, we've learnt so much. What works for some doesn't work for others, and always wanting to improve our programs, like our mentorship program and things like that. And someone just messaged me yesterday and she said, I've gone freelance, and if it wasn't for you and if it wasn't for Naui, that wouldn't have been the case. And we can't measure the impact that Naui has had. We do know that it's so important. I think especially in an industry where so many people are freelance, not everyone has a boss, a manager, a colleague that they can just swivel their chair around and say, hey, what's your thoughts on this? And lots of people inherently, I think, don't like asking for help. I'll always ask for help.
I'm wondering really if the term imposter syndrome is helpful? I mean, like, we're talking about behaviors and symptoms of that are just kind of maybe a normal response to the workplace. Is it helpful to put the term imposter syndrome on it?
But different people respond differently, but I think in my experience, it tends to be a lot more helpful to name it imposter feelings. And as I say, feelings come and go. If we can say I feel like an imposter right now, and we can say that, if we feel like we can say that to someone, then that's great, because you can go, I'm slightly out of my comfort zone. Do I need some support or not? Or am I going to be okay just pushing myself to do something? So I think there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the feeling. If we can harness the feelings and do something positive with those feelings, then we can push beyond it. As I said, it's when it debilitates us, that's not a good thing. But I think the more we talk about syndromes, I think it doesn't help us. I can't see the positivity of talking about a syndrome rather than feelings that come and go.
I think it can be detrimental. I think we're overcomplicating, overanalyzing in a world that is already very complicated. I think sometimes we do tend to add fuel to the fire in certain situations.
I think if we kind of change it to whether or not I feel confident, I think, a lot of people who are experiencing imposter feelings because I don't feel confident doing that, or I don't feel like I've got the experience and therefore my confidence isn't as high. If it's something like public speaking, those people that are speaking on a topic that they know really well, they naturally find it a little bit more comfortable. It's okay to feel confident. We don't have to not feel confident about something, but if we don't, that's okay. We don't need to label it. We can recognise that we're not feeling confident and try and kind of practice and improve or whatever it might be. But yeah, I think there's the other side is a bit of a challenging side as well.
Amazing. I love that, swapping out I feel like an imposter or I don't feel very confident about this, which is something we should all say and be honest about at points. You've both given amazing advice so far, but I would just love to finish then this podcast on your best piece of advice for maybe the day-to-day feelings of imposter syndrome and how you can overcome those.
I would say find yourself an honest champion. I think I always know that I've had some amazing champions around me in terms of people that will big me up and make me feel great about something, but they're also always positive. And sometimes you need somebody that's going to be a little bit more honest with you, who's going to help you feel comfortable and confident in stuff, but is going to be honest when you can improve and things. So I think having an honest champion is really important, whether or not that's a friend or coach or colleague or manager, whoever it might be. So I think having an honest champion is really important. And I think celebrate the champagne moments. And I've said this for years, and it doesn't have to be champagne. It can be whatever you want, but celebrate those amazing moments, however small they are. We always used to joke about, particularly when I first started my business, was, this is a Prosecco level celebration. This is a Cremant or Cava level of celebration. This is a champagne. This is a real top level champagne moment. And actually giving yourself that opportunity to celebrate when you do something really well. Again, it goes back to that, we don't always celebrate our successes. And if you don't celebrate your successes, of course, you're going to never feel like you're worthy of doing something or you have a right to be there. So I think celebrate your champagne moments, however small they are, because they're still a champagne moment, and honest champions.
Something you said about that is really interesting. I haven't done it. I didn't come up with the idea, but if you have a really big goal, write it on the back of a bottle of champagne and then open it when you achieve the goal. Is just a little something off the back of what you said, but I might also have to give two. I was trying to toss between the two, but comfort zone and self-story. So find what pushes you out of your comfort zone and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it until you're no longer feeling that feeling of discomfort. And then the second is think about the way you speak to yourself. Your self-story is what you say to yourself. You say, patting yourself on the back, are you saying, I've done a really good job of this, or take pride in what you do, and be careful about those negative feelings. Don't get yourself down. If you're not going to be your biggest champion, who is? So think of your self-story and put yourself out of your comfort zone as much as possible.
Thank you for sharing those. And thank you for coming on The Meeting Room. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you both, Laura and Kat. And I hope to catch up with you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
At IHG Hotels and Resorts, we're in the business of you.
We're here to help you plug in,
Connect and recharge.
Make an impression,
and meet with confidence.
With 19 brands built for business,
your business gets even more rewarding.
With an award-winning loyalty program at 6,000 IHG hotels and resorts worldwide.